Magashule does not deserve to hold any public office and should be arrested. That's according to the former Free State MEC for Economic Development, Mxolisi Dukwana, during his testimony today at the State Capture Inquiry. Dukwana, who labelled the Secretary General of the ANC, Magashule, a blesser of many, testified how public money was abused in the much talked about asbestos deal in the Free State. The project was valued at 255 million rand. For more on this explosive testimony, we're joined in studio by our reporter following the story, Manqoba Mchunu. Great to have you with us, Manqoba. Take us through the sort of revelations that came out today.
Well, of course, it's serious allegations against the former Free State Premier, of course, involving him or implicating him in corruption. And of course, in this instance, through that asbestos contract that has awarded to a company just to merely do an audit of the houses that still had been using asbestos, or they still had asbestos at that time. And of course, the money that was issued in this tender was 255 million. But what is surprising is that from the onset, there were controversies. There were red flags to say in this project, because number one, the contract was signed for this project, for the commencement of this project, I mean, a day after the actual commencement of the project. And of course, there was no service level agreements that were there in the project. And we heard also of how Magashule, the former Free State Premier, had also benefited through kickbacks, as well as some of the officials, high-ranking officials. And what Mxolisi Dukwana is merely saying here is that this was merely a great heist. He calls it. He says the asbestos heist, he refers to it, because he says, in effect, these officials just wanted to loot, because the whole idea of this particular project, it was just an audit to count the number of houses.
It wasn't even fixing the asbestos problem. It was just doing an audit.
So it was an audit that was carried in 3 months, yet 255 million was paid. Let's take a listen to why he describes it as a great heist.
The asbestos audit was but an asbestos audit heist sponsored by the Premier of the Free State government. The asbestos audit heist was executed through the Premier's office by Mr. Magashule's personal assistant, employed by government at the behest of Mr. Magashule. This was not only a blatant abuse of power by Mr. Magashule, but a brazen commission of fraud, money laundering, and daylight robbery of the public purse.
And not only that, he's actually put a figure to how much Magashule was bribed. There's an Excel spreadsheet. We often say there's not enough evidence. You know, is there a paper trail here? How damning is this evidence against
Well, seemingly so, Francis, because, you know, today we got to hear of the leaked emails. Of course, they've been part of a book that has been written on this, Gangster State, which, you know, was written by a journalist, Peter Louis-Mayberg, on this issue. But of course, we got to hear the real nitty-gritties of, you know, these emails, as well as the link between these emails and Magashule. And of course, one of them linking him to making a request from the people that had benefited from this tender, or that received the tender, the company, asking them to pay for tuition fees of, you know, students that had been part of the government's tuition overseas. And of course, one of them involving an acting judge who had asked Magashule to ensure that he makes a payment for her daughter. So damning allegations, but of course, you know, we are hearing that, you know, Dukwana saying that, of course, he believes that with all of this rot that happened there, Magashule should actually be behind bars, and that he does not deserve to be in office. Let's take a listen.
With the information that we have presented today and many others, one, I submit that the involvement of Mr. Magashule in this asbestos audit heist makes him unfit to hold public office or the office of the Secretary General of the ANC. Mr. Magashule's suitable place of abode in public is a jail cell. If our law enforcement agencies were well oiled, Mr. Magashule and all those aided and abetted this asbestos audit heist should be doing time in jail.
Okay, sure. So, Manqoba, finally, and very quickly, where does this leave Magashule in terms of how frequently has he been implicated? How damning is the evidence sort of stacking up against him in the State Capture Commission?
Well, of course, Francis, will recall, this is not the first testimony we're hearing on the Free State. There is the Feeder Dairy Farm issue, where his name has also cropped up. Not extensively as this one, though. But, of course, we hear the similar names being, mentioned in those kind of testimonies. And, again, this one is very, very, in terms of his seriousness, is very serious against him. And, of course, he has before said that is willing to come to the commission if called to do so, to testify there. But whether that will happen and when that will happen, we're still not sure at the time. But what we're beginning to hear, Francis, of course, are the links, the similarities in the way that these projects were carried. All of them, there's a common thread. All of them didn't follow proper procurement processes. All of them also, did not follow or violated some sections of the FMAA, and there were kickbacks, of course, that were part of it.
All right, thank you very much. Our reporter following the State Capture Commission, Manqoba Mchunu. And another top story of the day, Chris Helder?